Don't scream where no one listens. Stay silent where they long to find you. When a man gets blocked by the woman he loves, he doesn't just lose contact, he loses a world. The messages, the stories, the daily moments vanish. And worse than, her absence is watching her appear happy without him, smiling with someone else, as if he never existed. The instinct is to chase, to beg, to text, to look for closure, for some shred of attention. But this man, he chose something different. He chose total silence, not as a power play, not out of pride, but as an act of inner strength, because he realized that no external validation could heal the internal wound. If he was going to survive emotionally, he needed to do the unthinkable, disappear, not just from her life, but from his emotional dependence on her. This is where the real journey begins, a path most men never walk, a transformation that doesn't seek to win her back, but to win himself back. Because what's at stake isn't just the relationship, it's the identity of the man who remains, and this man decided to rebuild from the ruins. In the words of Jung, from Man and His Symbols, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. His silence wasn't passive, it was intentional, strategic, the foundation of a new version of himself. He embraced the ancient wisdom of the Stoics. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And this man chose to stop reacting and start evolving. Because when you stop chasing what hurt you, you begin to attract what heals you. This story isn't about getting her back. It's about getting yourself back. It's about realizing that the real power isn't in convincing someone to love you again, but in becoming someone you can finally respect. This is the silent power that turns absence into presence. And this is only the beginning. He checked his phone, nothing. Again, still blocked, still invisible. The woman he once poured his soul into had erased him like a bad memory. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. And the pain wasn't loud. It was quiet, suffocating, private. The kind of grief that doesn't scream but hums beneath the skin. That leaves you staring at the ceiling, wondering if you were ever real to someone who now pretends you don't exist. Most men, at this point, spiral. They send that last message. Try to call from a different number, ask mutual friends, lurk on her stories with anonymous accounts, hoping somehow to still be noticed, to matter. But he didn't. He didn't beg. He didn't chase. Something cracked inside him, not from defeat but from clarity. He asked himself, if she can block me like I was nothing, why did I ever give her everything? That moment wasn't weakness. It was awakening. The pain was still there, sharp and constant, but now it had a direction. Blocking someone isn't always about hate. Sometimes it's control. Sometimes it's a way of silencing their impact. And when a man is always emotionally available, always answering, always explaining, always hoping, he becomes predictable, familiar, and worst of all, forgettable. The brain ignores what it always has. What is rare, it studies. What is missing, it wonders about. He had been a constant. Now he was an absence. And in that void, something subtle began to shift, not in her, but in him. He stopped reaching out mentally. He stopped imagining what she was doing, stopped replaying old messages, because that silence he imposed wasn't just silence to her, it was space for himself. But that didn't mean it was easy. He felt the pull, that ache, to say just one thing, to remind her of the good times, to defend himself from the cruel idea that he never mattered. But then came the words of Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And strength meant holding the silence, choosing not to explain, choosing to be still. Because silence isn't weakness, it's mastery. Still, some nights were harder. The loneliness didn't feel noble, it felt empty. Jung once wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." And that was the weight, having so much left to say and no place to say it. But instead of seeking her ears, he turned inward. He started writing, lifting, running, praying. He replaced the urge to check her profile with checking on himself. He detoxed not just from her, but from the version of himself who needed her to feel whole. No more subliminal posts, no more strategic stories, no more lurking. He let the silence breathe. Let the space expand. And in that stillness, something began to shift deep within. He stopped waiting. He didn't want her to come back the same. He wanted to come back different. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of power. Most people misunderstand silence. They think it's weakness, passivity, surrender. But in truth, silence is one of the most active, difficult, and deliberate forms of self-control a man can develop, especially after heartbreak. Especially when the world teaches you to chase, to perform, to win her back at all costs. But he didn't chase. He withdrew, not in bitterness, but in mastery. This wasn't a tactic, it was a philosophy. The principle behind the no-contact rule isn't to make her miss you. It's to remember yourself. Because until you disconnect completely, from the phone, from the fantasy, from the feedback loop, you're still tethered, still waiting, still reacting. And the one who reacts is never in control. Stoic philosopher Epictetus said in Discourses, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." She was beyond his control. Her feelings, her choices, her new relationship, none of it could be influenced without betraying his dignity. So instead, he focused on the only thing he had left, his mind. He uninstalled the apps, deleted the chats, removed photos, set hard boundaries with mutual friends. No checking, no questioning, no responding to breadcrumbs. Not because he was angry, because he was done leaking energy into something that no longer nourished him. This was not indifference. This was evolution, and in that silence something remarkable happened. He started to hear himself again, his own voice, his own pain, his unmet needs. Not the version of himself who had twisted into whatever she wanted, but the real version. The raw, unfiltered man who had long been buried beneath compromise and emotional dependency. Carl Jung, in the Red Book, speaks of this confrontation with the self. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. This silence wasn't about her anymore. It was about awakening, about cutting the addiction to external validation and beginning the uncomfortable, holy work of self-ownership. And yes, there were temptations, days where the silence felt unbearable, where hope crept in like poison. What if she's missing me? What if she thinks I never cared? The ego screamed for visibility, for proof, for a sign, but each time he resisted, he grew. Because discipline is not about feeling good, it's about doing what's necessary even when it hurts. And this man was hurting, yes, but more than that, he was healing. He began to see the no-contact rule not as a break, but as a ritual. A sacred commitment to no longer betray himself for the illusion of connection. Silence became a sanctuary, a space where his thoughts were no longer colonized by her memory, where his time, once spent crafting perfect replies, was now invested in building his body, mind, and mission. He read every night, meditated at dawn, started running again, joined a men's group. He stopped being emotionally available to a ghost and became spiritually available to his own growth. He built habits, structure, peace, and most importantly, momentum, because nothing is more powerful than a man who has nothing left to prove and everything left to build. And what happens when a man stops chasing? He becomes rare. Predictability dies. Familiarity fades. Mystery grows. She begins to wonder, not because he's sending signals, but because he's sending nothing. And the human mind can't stand an unanswered question. What is he doing? Who is he becoming? Has he moved on? That void, that absence, it begins to haunt her. Not because he intended it, but because she expected him to remain emotionally available. And now he's become unreadable. Carl Jung wrote in Psychological Types, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That's what this man was doing, facing the uncomfortable truth of his own identity, without distractions, without seeking approval, without needing her recognition to feel valuable. This was his silence, not as a punishment, but as a mirror. He didn't need her to see him. He needed to see himself. And that is the paradox. The less he sought her, the more powerful his presence became. Not as a man trying to be chosen, but as a man finally choosing himself. He thought the silence would get easier, that after a few days or weeks the ache would dull. But absence isn't numbness, it's sharp, it's loud in the places you thought were quiet. Every morning without a message, every night without closure. The human brain doesn't just feel pain, it obsesses over it. And the absence of answers is the most addictive kind of suffering. This man wasn't immune. He had days where he stared at her profile picture, even though he couldn't click it. Nights where her name burned on his screen, but he never typed it. He battled with the ghost of what if. What if she comes back? What if she doesn't? What if she never cared? These questions haunted him like shadows. But here's the truth. Silence is not the enemy, it's the revealer. It shows you your wounds, unfiltered. Without the distraction of her voice, he was forced to listen to his own. And that voice was broken, desperate, trained to seek approval, terrified of abandonment. He realized the pain wasn't just about losing her, it was about what she represented. Validation, identity, escape. And that realization, it crushed him because it meant the work ahead was much deeper than getting her back. It meant rebuilding the self he never fully met. Carl Jung, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, writes, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." That's what he had done, poured himself into her, so he wouldn't have to meet himself. But now there was nowhere else to go. No messages to distract him, no arguments to replay, just silence. And in that silence, the soul speaks. He journaled every morning. Not because it fixed him, but because it forced him to show up. He wrote letters he never sent, he cried, he broke, he fell into spirals, tempted to write her name again and again. But instead of fighting the pain, he began to observe it. Like a scientist, like a stoic. Marcus Aurelius in Meditations said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." He started doing just that, revoking her control over his mind, rewriting the story. Not because it was easy, because it was necessary. And then came the deeper layer, forgiveness. He forgave her, not by sending a message or expecting closure, but silently, internally. He stopped seeing her as the villain in his story. She was simply a mirror, a turning point, a lesson wrapped in a person. And that shift which changed everything, because forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about releasing yourself from the hook they left in your soul. He forgave himself too, for loving too much, for tolerating too little, for confusing attention with intimacy. He let go of the fantasy version of her, the one his mind clung to in desperation, because that version never existed. The woman who blocked him walked away and chose someone else. That was her truth. And his truth was that he had betrayed his own needs long before she left. So he created new needs. He committed to daily workouts, cold showers, deep reading, breath work, no faking, no forcing, just showing up every day, brick by brick, building a version of himself that could walk into the fire and not flinch. He reconnected with solitude, with the silence of early mornings and the calm of quiet nights. He learned to sit with his sadness, not fight it, and in that stillness he uncovered power. Real, quiet, undeniable power, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen, but is impossible to ignore. And slowly the pain changed. It didn't disappear, but it transformed, from something that consumed him to something that refined him. He no longer needed her to validate his worth. The pain became part of his fuel, not his cage. And that made him dangerous, not reckless but centered, focused, quietly powerful. Because pain, when faced directly, becomes purpose, and that absence, when held with dignity, becomes presence. Something shifted, not overnight, not with fanfare, but gradually, in the small, silent moments. The man who once begged for love began building a life that no longer needed it, not because he stopped believing in love, but because he stopped outsourcing his identity to it. The silence had stripped him down, and in that raw space something new began to grow: discipline. He replaced his morning scroll with journaling, his late-night anxiety with workouts, his overthinking with breathwork. He didn't just distract himself, he rebuilt himself. The man who once stared at her stories now stared into his soul. Carl Jung, in The Undiscovered Self, writes, "The man who looks too far outside himself risks losing himself." And that's exactly what he had done. He had lost himself, trying to be everything for someone who never truly saw him. But now, in solitude, he finally saw himself. This wasn't about becoming colder. It was about becoming clearer. He began refining his habits, waking up early, eating clean, reading the books he once postponed. He built routines not out of obsession, but out of devotion, not to her, not to revenge, but to his own potential. Every drop of pain was now being redirected into momentum. His body changed, his posture, his voice. People around him noticed, friends commented, strangers responded. He wasn't louder, he was quieter but heavier. There was a new gravity to his presence. Something settled, certain, powerful. He didn't chase attention anymore. He commanded it without effort, without noise. He advanced his career, took risks, learned new skills, focused on creating instead of reacting. He started saying no to things that drained him, cut out people who echoed his old insecurities. He no longer tried to prove himself, he just proved himself to himself. Daily, privately. He stopped arguing with his past. He accepted it, understood it, used it. His heartbreak became the soil for something unshakable. His focus was no longer on being chosen. It was on becoming a man who could choose, a man who didn't react emotionally but moved with clarity. This is what happens when a man stops trying to be seen and starts becoming someone worth seeing. And that energy? It's magnetic, because we live in a world obsessed with quick validation. Likes, replies, reactions. But he no longer played that game. While others begged for attention, he became scarce. And that scarcity, it began to speak louder than any words. Even to her, she hadn't reached out. But she noticed. She saw the changes. Through mutual friends, online whispers, passing moments, his silence wasn't absence anymore. It was intrigue. She couldn't place it, but something about him felt different, less available, less predictable, and unpredictability is intoxicating. The human brain fills gaps. When he was posting sad quotes, she could read him, predict him. But now, there was nothing. No clues, no signals, just a man who seemed to have forgotten her and somehow become more. And that scared her. Because when someone you discarded becomes stronger without you, it confronts you with your own judgment. And she began to wonder, did I lose something I never really understood? Is he still hurting? Or has he truly moved on? That emotional uncertainty, the one he used to live in, was now hers. But he wasn't doing any of it for her. That's what made it so powerful. He no longer craved being chosen. He was too busy choosing himself. And that shift made him enigmatic, unreadable, powerful. Marcus Aurelius, again in Meditations, said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That became his mantra. He stopped seeking the title of better man and simply embodied it. No one needed to clap. No one needed to notice, and still they did, because true transformation doesn't scream, it radiates. He walked through fire and came out quieter, stronger, and absolutely clear. No more proving, no more performing, just presence. A presence so solid that even his silence became unforgettable. And in that presence the world began to bend in his direction, not because he forced it, but because he finally aligned with who he truly was. She didn't realize it at first. At first his silence felt like relief, like freedom. No more unread messages, no more emotional weight, no more expectations. It was quiet, easy. She told herself she had made the right choice. Moved on, replaced him, smiled in photos, laughed in public, but slowly something changed. She began to notice the space where he used to be, The good morning text that never came, the dependable emotional availability, the safe presence. She checked her phone out of habit, then remembered he was gone. Not angry, not begging, just absent. And that absence, it wasn't empty, it was loud. The human mind hates gaps. When there's silence, it fills the void with imagination. And because he gave her nothing, no likes, no stories, no cryptic posts, her brain began to ask the questions he used to ask. Where is he? What is he thinking? Has he already moved on? The more silent he became, the more present he felt. She had power before. She controlled the narrative, the rhythm. But now? She couldn't read him, couldn't feel him. And that emotional certainty she used to enjoy had collapsed into doubt. And in that doubt, the memory of who he used to be started to echo. Not the desperate version, the devoted version, the one who saw her deeply, who gave without demand, who was fully present. And slowly she began to miss what she once dismissed. But it wasn't just memory. It was mystery. Because the man she once knew would have reached out by now. He would have broken the silence, tried to reconnect, asked for another chance, but this man, he vanished. Not to hide, but to grow. And the silence he left behind was not a game. It was an energy shift. She started watching his profile again, looking for traces, hoping to catch a glimpse. Her curiosity became obsession. Why? Because she didn't have control anymore. She was now on the receiving end of unpredictability, and unpredictability creates attraction. The kind rooted not in nostalgia, but in uncertainty. Carl Jung, in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, says, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate. That's what was happening. Her unresolved feelings, her suppressed curiosity, were now manifesting as an unconscious pull toward him. A magnetism she couldn't explain. And the more she thought of him, the more her mind began to imagine. Who was he with? Had he met someone new? Did she still matter? Her imagination filled the silence with images far more powerful than anything he could have said. That's the power of absence. It lets the mind do the storytelling. And imagination, unprovoked, is the loudest voice in the room. She scrolled through old photos, revisited memories she had locked away. She compared. She wondered. Because no matter how many new faces she saw, none of them carried the weight of presence he once gave so freely. Meanwhile, he wasn't chasing. He was rising. Every step he took toward himself made her feel the distance more. His absence became a reflection of his new value. He wasn't reachable anymore, not emotionally, not spiritually. And that unavailability, when done not out of ego but evolution, is irresistible. She started remembering things she hadn't valued, the way he listened, his calm presence, the way he never judged her fears, the depth, the reliability. It hit her slowly, then all at once. Because now, surrounded by noise and shallow attention, she missed the one person who gave her peace. But the paradox? He no longer needed to be remembered. This was the beauty of the transformation. She didn't miss him because he tried to be missed. She missed him because he had outgrown the version of himself that used to chase her. And that scarcity, it rewrote the story. His absence became presence, a presence she felt in her thoughts, in her doubts, in her dreams, and the man who once begged to be seen as was now unforgettable. It started subtly, a reaction to an old post, a mutual friend mentioning she asked about him. Then the message, short, simple. Hey, I was just thinking about you. The same woman who blocked him, ignored him, replaced him. Now returning, tentative, uncertain. Why? Because his absence had become louder than his presence ever was, and not the old him, the emotionally available, predictable, desperate version. No, she was reaching out to a man transformed, a man she no longer recognized. She didn't expect this version. She expected the door to still be open, the emotional welcome mat still out. But now, he was different, still kind, still respectful, but no longer available in the same way. His energy didn't lean toward her. It stood tall on its own. She asked how he was, said she had been thinking about everything. that she didn't realize what she had. She brought up memories, laughed at old jokes, hinted at regrets. But he no longer needed those words. Not because he didn't care, but because he no longer needed to be chosen. He had already chosen himself. This wasn't a moment of triumph. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. Her return wasn't his reward. His transformation was. He listened, calm, present, grateful, but detached. He could feel her trying to reconnect, yet he knew deep down that chapter was complete. Not because she was a bad person, but because the man he had become could no longer fit into the life she left behind. Carl Jung, in Psychological Reflections, that wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And this man, this version, was awake. He thanked her, not for the message, but for the pain. Because without it, he would have never grown, never awakened. Her rejection became his rebirth. She left expecting him to break. He rose instead. Now he didn't chase, he didn't cling, he didn't hope, he chose. And he chose peace. He chose purpose. He chose himself. This was never about her. It was never about getting her back, proving his worth, or making her regret. That was the illusion. The real story. It was always about coming home to himself, about breaking the cycle of emotional dependence, and reclaiming the parts of him he once gave away too easily. Because the greatest victory is not being wanted again. It's no longer needing to be. His silence was not revenge, it was a rebirth, a sacred pause between who he was and who he was meant to become. He didn't need closure. He didn't need validation. He needed to remember who he was before he forgot himself in someone else. And that's the truth most people miss. You don't become powerful by being louder. You become powerful by becoming unavailable to what once drained you. You stop begging. You stop proving. You simply become. Carl Jung, in The Symbolic Life, said, "Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health." And this man turned his greatest emotional difficulty into the foundation of his strength. He didn't numb it. He didn't run from it. He faced it, transformed it, became it. She came back. Yes. But by then, he had already returned to the most important person he'd ever lost. Himself. He no longer moved through life, waiting to be chosen. He walked with the quiet, magnetic confidence of a man who chooses. He didn't chase closure. He didn't seek attention. He simply lived in alignment. His life no longer revolved around being wanted. It revolved around being whole. Because the best revenge is not to hurt. It's to become unforgettable. So to every man who's been blocked, ignored, replaced, listen closely. Your power is not in what you say. It's in what you no longer need to explain. Your strength is not in being noticed. It's in becoming someone who cannot be overlooked. And your value? It's not in being accepted again. It's in never abandoning yourself again. Don't scream where no one listens. Make silence where they crave to find you.